"I don't belong here," I muttered under my breath, watching my parents fuss over my twin sister like I was invisible. Growing up in our suburban Michigan home, I always knew I wasn't the child they wanted. My sister, let's call her Emily, was their golden girl, everything they dreamed of, and me, I was just extra. My parents didn't sugarcoat it. I remember the day they told me straight to my face that they wished they'd only had one kid, and it was Emily. I was the bonus they never asked for. That statement didn't just stint, it left a permanent scar. Emily had the perfect bedroom, pink curtains, a Disney princess bedspread, shelves packed with toys I could only dream of. Every morning I'd wake up in my tiny, drafty room with a bed that squeaked like it was groaning in protest, a dresser older than I was, and a sense that the world outside was more welcoming than my own home. Breakfast was never mine. My parents would dote on Emily, discussing her upcoming gymnastics practice, the new shoes she needed, her science project, while I quietly ate leftover cereal, careful not to make eye contact. It wasn't just neglect. It was a systematic erasure of my existence. At school, things weren't much better. Parent-teacher conferences were a nightmare. My mom and dad would gush over Emily's finger painting like it was the Mona Lisa, while my own report card sat, ignored, in their hands. I remember trying so hard, staying up late to finish homework, hoping that if I got good grades, they might notice me. But I was invisible. Their love and attention were finite, and I wasn't in the allocation. Emily got the designer clothes, the attention, the best meals at dinner. I got the hand-me-downs, leftovers, and the occasional scolding for daring to want more. Even the smallest toy she had was treated like sacred relic touch. And it was my fault. The only refuge I had was my grandfather. Grandpa Joe lived on the outskirts of town and didn't treat me like a shadow. He took me fishing, told stories about his youth, and made me feel normal. For a few hours each weekend, I could forget being the unwanted twin. But when he fell ill with cancer, that sanctuary was stripped away. My parents would only let Emily visit him, bringing flowers and gifts, while I was told to stay home and help out around the house. I'd sneak over anyway, sitting by his bedside, listening to his soft, encouraging words, feeling both love and sorrow at the same time. When he passed, it felt like the last thread tying me to anyone who genuinely cared had been severed. Life at home deteriorated even further after that. The occasional acknowledgement I might have received vanished completely. Meals, conversations, family photos, everything centered on Emily, while I blended into the background. I became adept at staying invisible, biting back protests when I saw yet another new dress, another special privilege handed to her. My father's favorite line was, "Why can't you be more like Emily?" Emily, of course, thrived on this favoritism, turning on the waterworks whenever she wanted something, ensuring she always had my parents at her side. I learned to be silent, to shrink into myself, hoping for survival rather than recognition. But inside, resentment simmered. Every ignored achievement, every gift she received that I didn't. Every day I woke up feeling unseen. It built a quiet, burning anger. I'd lie awake at night staring at the ceiling, wondering what I was doing wrong. Maybe, I thought, if I just tried harder, if I was quieter, if I earned it enough, they'd notice me. But I never did. And when Emily, at just 16, announced she was pregnant, the world tilted further. Where I had been cast aside, suddenly she was celebrated. A shotgun wedding, family excitement, planning the nursery and me. Told to pack my bags. My room, The one place I could pretend this wasn't happening was to become her child's nursery. At 16, I was left with nothing. I grabbed what little I had: clothes, a few books, mementos from Grandpa Joanne, retreated to the backyard with an old tent from the garage. Nights were freezing, the ground unforgiving, but at least I was close enough to hear the laughter and excitement inside, the home that should have included me. Hunger gnawed at me. Cold seeped into my bones. And still, I reminded myself I had no choice but to survive. I had to figure out a way to exist in a world that had told me, time and again, that I didn't belong. The nights in that tent were long, cold, and lonely, but I quickly learned that complaining wouldn't change anything. I had to survive. Every morning, I'd wake with frost in my hair, my hands numb from the night's cold, and force myself to get moving. I started knocking on doors around the neighborhood, offering to mow lawns, shovel driveways, or do any odd job people needed. Most turned me away, giving looks of pity or annoyance, but a few took a chance on me. Every dollar I earned was a lifeline, every small task a reminder that I could make it without them. One day, wandering past the local bakery, the warm smell of fresh bread hit me like a punch in the gut. I stood there staring through the window, half starving, and caught the attention of the owner. A gruff older man named Frank. He asked me straight out, "You looking for work, kid?" I nodded without thinking, knowing this was an opportunity. He handed me a broom, a dustpan, and a list of simple tasks: sweeping floors, helping with deliveries, cleaning. It wasn't glamorous, and the pay was minimal, but it was enough. And for the first time in months, I felt like I belonged somewhere. The work was grueling. I woke at 4 a.m., long before sunrise, trudging through the frost-covered streets to reach the bakery. My back ached from scrubbing floors and lifting heavy bags of flour, but the warmth inside that small shop made it bearable. Frank didn't coddle me. He was strict, no nonsense, and had zero patience for laziness. Yet, slowly, he began to treat me like a person, not a burden. He shared his own past, telling me how he'd been kicked out as a teen and built his bakery from nothing. In his stories, I saw myself reflected: a kid with nothing, scraping for survival, yet refusing to quit. Weeks turned into months. I slept in the dusty, makeshift storage room above the bakery, barely big enough for a single bed, but at least it was warm and dry. I learned to knead dough, shape loaves, and bake pastries with care. Frank would give the smallest nod when I did something right, and that acknowledgement, tiny as it was, became fuel for my determination. Each day I returned home from work and walked past my old house, no longer bitter but focused. The tent was a memory, the backyard a ghost of the past. I was building something new for myself, brick by brick, day by day. Schoolwork was still a struggle. Balancing shifts at the bakery, side jobs, and keeping up with classes pushed me to the brink. I often studied by flashlight in the storage room, hunched over textbooks while the winter wind rattled the window. Hunger gnawed at me, yet I persisted. I reminded myself that survival wasn't enough, had to rise above this. Every step forward, no matter how small, was a victory. I wasn't just a forgotten kid anymore. I was someone taking control of his life. Frank became more than a boss. He was a mentor. One evening, after a long day, he handed me an envelope. "First real paycheck," he said gruffly, and for the first time, I held in my hands money I'd truly earned. It wasn't much by any standard, but it was enough to buy groceries, replace worn-out clothes, and slowly plan for the future. With that envelope, I felt a flicker of hope, a glimpse of freedom. I wasn't trapped in my parents' neglect anymore. The life I had imagined, one where I could breathe and belong somewhere, was slowly taking shape. Winter passed, spring arrived, and I continued stacking small victories. I saved every dollar, living like I was still in that tent, careful with expenses, planning for bigger dreams. I picked up extra shifts, helped neighbors, anything to accumulate a buffer. Frank's trust grew, too. He handed me keys to lock up the bakery at night, a gesture that spoke louder than any praise. It was trust, respect, recognition. I realized for the first time that life didn't have to be about surviving the cruelty of those who should love you. I could build a world where I mattered. Eventually, I had enough saved to consider my own place. The idea terrified my rent bills. Responsibility, but the thought of finally claiming a space that was mine, entirely mine, ignited a fire I hadn't felt in years. I poured myself into planning, researching, and preparing. Every loaf of bread, every doughy mistake, every sore back and aching hands became part of my training, shaping me into someone ready to claim independence. My past, the neglect, the favoritism toward Emily was still there, a shadow that followed me, but it no longer had the power to define me. After months of saving every spare dollar, I finally found a modest 3-bedroom house on the outskirts of town. It wasn't anything fancy, no sprawling lawn, no grand entryway, just a simple, sturdy home with 4 walls I could finally call my own. Walking through the empty rooms for the first time, I felt a surge of pride and disbelief. This was mine. No one had given it to me. No one had helped. I had earned every step to this point, and nothing could take that away. The first nights were strange. Sitting in an empty living room, only a thin mattress on the floor and a couple of boxes for furniture, I felt both exhilarated and terrified. This was freedom, yes, but freedom came with responsibility. No parents to dictate my schedule, no sister to overshadow me, just me and the life I was building from scratch. I slowly began furnishing the house, scavenging thrift stores, yard sales, and Craigslist for bargains. Every small piece, a couch, a table, a lamp, was a victory. Proof that I could create a home without relying on the family that had discarded me. And then, almost as if the universe had a cruel sense of timing, they showed up. One late afternoon, I heard the doorbell ring and went to answer, expecting a delivery or maybe a neighbor stopping by. But it wasn't a package. It was them. Mum, Dad, Emily, her husband, and their 3 kids, all smiling as if nothing had ever happened. My stomach turned, a mix of anger, disbelief, and that old familiar hurt that had haunted me since I was a teen. Mum was the first to speak, her tone saccharine, almost theatrical. Surprise. "We heard you bought a house. We're so proud." I gripped the doorknob tightly, trying to keep my face neutral, while every memory of tent nights, cold winters, and being ignored surged back. Emily stepped forward, baby in her arms, surveying my modest entryway like a queen inspecting her new dominion. I realized instantly that this wasn't a friendly visit. They were here for something. Dad cleared his throat, trying to muster authority. "Son, with Emily's family growing and your big house, maybe it's time to let bygones be bygones. Family should stick together, right?" My lips curled into a bitter laugh. Family. These were the same people who had shoved me into a tent at 16, leaving me to fend for myself while celebrating my sister's pregnancy as if it were a national holiday. I forced myself to speak evenly. "What exactly are you asking for?" Mum stepped closer, all smiles and fake warmth. Well, we thought it'd be nice if we all moved in here, one big, happy family, like old times. The words hit me like a physical blow. They wanted to take over the home I had built, the sanctuary I had carved from hardship. Rage and disbelief churned inside me, memories of frostbitten nights and stolen childhoods boiling to the surface. No, I said firmly, voice shaking only slightly. That's not happening. Confusion replaced the smiles on their faces. Mum tried to reason, but we're family. We should help each other. I could feel my hands trembling, but I held my ground. Where was that attitude when I was 16, living in a tent in the backyard? Where was family then? For a moment, they were silent. Dad's face reddened, Emily's expression faltering. I built this place on my own, I continued, my voice gaining strength. Every ounce of this house is mine. I worked day and night to get here. You will not just walk in and take it. Emily tried the last tactic, feigning hurt. Come on, don't be selfish. We need the space. You owe us. That was it. That was the final straw. I snapped. Owe you? I owe you nothing. You kicked me out when I was a kid, left me with nothing, and now you think you can take what I've built. Get out. My parents stood frozen, faces red and pale all at once. I saw a flicker of something, perhaps realization that the scared, quiet boy they once knew was gone. I was no longer backing down. When they finally left, I leaned against the door, trembling from anger and adrenaline, but also relief. For the first time in years, I felt a strange sense of liberation. I had finally asserted myself, defended my life, and reclaimed my autonomy. The battle wasn't over, I knew that. They were family, and toxic people have a way of finding cracks to wedge themselves back in. But for now, this was my victory. My home, my life, and no parent, no sibling was going to take that from me. In the following weeks, I focused on fortifying what I had built. Legal measures were taken, precautions put in place, and every phone call or attempt to guilt me was ignored. I realized that freedom wasn't just about owning property, it was about owning my decisions, my life, and my identity. I had been unwanted once, ignored and discarded, but I had survived. And now, for the first time, I could breathe in the knowledge that I didn't need their approval or presence to define my worth. It started with a letter, one that looked official enough to make my heart skip a beat. I came home from work one evening, expecting the usual bills, maybe a flyer, and there it was, a thick envelope in my mailbox with my name on it. Something about it screamed trouble, and my gut told me this wasn't going to be good news. Hands trembling, I tore it open. Inside was a legal notice. My sister, Emily, was attempting to contest ownership of my house, claiming it should be shared as family property. I stared at the papers, disbelief washing over me. After everything, after years of neglect, after sleeping in a tent in the backyard, after being shoved aside while my sister's life was celebrated, now they were trying to take the one thing I had earned with my own hands. I felt my chest tighten, a mix of anger, betrayal, and that old, familiar sting of hurt that never quite goes away. I didn't even wait to think. I called a lawyer the next day, Karen. A sharp, no-sense attorney took one look at the documents and nodded. They don't have a leg to stand on, she said firmly, her eyes steady and unwavering. But they'll try. People like this always try. You've got your work cut out for you, but we can win. The key is evidence, documentation, and making sure every step is airtight. Relief, mixed with determination, surged through me. I wasn't going to let them take the one thing that symbolized my freedom. The one thing I had built from nothing. Over the next few weeks, my family did everything they could to turn the situation against me. Calls, messages, even friends and distant relatives reached out, all echoing the same sentiment. Why can't you just let your family in? It was frustrating beyond words. No one asked about my side. No one seemed to remember the nights I spent in the cold. The years I spent working tirelessly just to survive while they lived comfortably. To them, I was just the difficult, ungrateful one. But I refused to let their narrative define me. Karen guided me through gathering every scrap of proof. I had receipts from the bakery and the convenience store, documents showing consistent earnings, bank statements proving the money I had saved, and even records of purchases I made to slowly furnish the house. I documented everything meticulously, knowing that my life's work, every small sacrifice and hardship, was at stake. But then came the discovery that truly shook me to my core. Through careful digging into financial records, Karen uncovered the truth my parents had been hiding for years. My grandfather, the only person in my life who had ever truly cared, had left me an inheritance, a substantial one intended for me when I turned 18. But through some loopholes and deliberate manipulation, my parents had gained control of it. They had been using that money to fund Emily's wedding, bail out her husband's failed ventures, pay off their own debts, and even contribute to the down payment for their new home. All the while, I struggled to survive, scraping together odd jobs just to eat and keep warm. The rage I felt was indescribable. How could they? How could they take what was meant for me, let me live in near poverty while they enjoyed a comfortable life off my rightful inheritance? Every night I had spent shivering in that tent. Every day I had spent exhausted and hungry. All of it was compounded by the betrayal. I had been counting on them to be family, and instead they had been using me as a convenient source of cash. The realization ignited a fire in me I hadn't felt before. I wasn't just fighting for my home anymore. I was fighting for justice, for recognition of my worth, and for every stolen moment of my life. When the legal battle began, it was brutal. My family tried every trick in the book to discredit me, portraying me as greedy, manipulative, and ungrateful. But the evidence was irrefutable. Receipts, bank statements, legal documents, and the undeniable truth of my hard work and independence all pointed to one fact. I had earned my life, and they had stolen from me. I began to feel a sense of empowerment I had never known. For the first time, I wasn't the scared, powerless kid who had been shoved aside. I was in control. The courtroom was tense the day the verdict was read. My parents and Emily sat across from me, all smiles forced and uneasy, as if they were attending some family gathering instead of facing the consequences of years of deception. I gripped the edge of the wooden bench, heart pounding, palms slick with nervous anticipation. The judge, a stern woman with eyes that seemed to pierce right through the facade, reviewed the case with meticulous care. Every document, every receipt, every statement I had painstakingly gathered was laid out before her. My lawyer, Karen, stood beside me with a quiet confidence, her gaze unwavering. When she presented the evidence of my inheritance being siphoned off and used to fund Emily's life and my parents' luxuries, the faces across the room faltered. I could see the panic flicker in their eyes. They hadn't expected their meticulous cover-up to unravel so thoroughly. I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and apprehension. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about finally proving my worth. reclaiming the dignity that had been denied to me for so long. After what felt like an eternity, the judge spoke. Her voice was firm, uncompromising. After reviewing the evidence and testimonies, the court rules in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Jason Harper. The defendants are ordered to reimburse all funds wrongfully obtained from the estate, including damages, and must cease all claims on the property known as 451 Maplewood Drive. Relief washed over me in a wave so powerful I nearly gasped aloud. Every ounce of stress, every sleepless night, every hardship had led to this moment. I wasn't just vindicated, I was free. The reactions of my family were instantaneous and predictable. Emily's jaw dropped, her carefully maintained composure crumbling. My mother's face twisted with disbelief and anger, while my father's color drained, leaving him pale and speechless. Calls and messages began immediately. Pleased, excuses, apologies, but I didn't respond. For years, I had chased their approval, and it had never come. Now, faced with the truth, there was no room for negotiation, no desire to give them another chance. I had learned that some people only act when it benefits them, and I refused to be drawn back into their toxic cycle. Walking out of the courthouse, the crisp autumn air felt liberating. For the first time in my life, I wasn't running, hiding, or waiting for someone to care. I had reclaimed what was rightfully mine, built a life from nothing, and stood tall despite every obstacle. The city skyline stretched out before me, filled with endless possibilities, and I realized that freedom was far more than a place. It was owning my story, my choices, and my future back at my house. I let myself breathe. The rooms I had painstakingly furnished now felt like a sanctuary rather than a temporary refuge. I had my kitchen, my living room, my small backyard, everything I had fought for, everything I had earned. For the first time, I truly felt like I belonged somewhere, and that sense of belonging wasn't tied to anyone else's approval. Family wasn't blood, was respect, support, and care. All things I had learned to give myself, though I knew my parents and Emily might attempt to claw their way back into my life. I had the tools, the boundaries, and the strength to stand firm. I was no longer the scared teenager living in a tent, invisible and forgotten. I was Jason Harper, self-made, resilient, and unstoppable. And as I looked out over my little town, the sun dipping below the horizon, I whispered to myself, I am enough. I've always been enough, and no one will ever take that from me again.